If you ever were paying attention to the NBA in the late 2000s, you definitely heard about this debate. Who is the best point guard in the NBA? Chris Paul or Deron Williams? Back then, they were two of the brightest stars at the point guard position. But right now, at the advanced age of 38, Chris Paul will be coming off the bench for the first time in his career. And with regards to Deron Williams, I don't even know how he will be remembered. His decent yet short-lived NBA career leaves a complicated legacy under his name. Nevertheless, I think it's a real shame that people forget how elite he truly was. So let's rewind. Deron Williams and Chris Paul were selected back-to-back in the 2005 draft, with Deron being a number 3 pick and Paul right behind him at number 4. And for the next 5 or 6 years, there was a real rivalry between the two. Paul was the Rookie of the Year above Deron, and Deron led his team to playoffs before Paul. Then Paul made the All-Star game before Deron. They went back and forth earlier in their career. But then again, for the most part, Paul was the clear number 1. Chris would have been a unanimous pick for Rookie of the Year had a Jazz broadcaster not voted for Williams. Paul made the All-NBA first team and finished second in the MVP voting. Yet Deron made the All-NBA second team and finished 9th in the MVP voting. Still, a case could be made that Williams was better. In just his second season, Deron led the Jazz to the Western Conference Finals. Even though they lost to the eventual champ San Antonio Spurs, it was during this series that he really put the league on notice. Against one of the best defenses in the NBA, Williams played his best basketball of the season, averaging 26 and 8 on great efficiency. On the other hand, Paul had played well in the playoffs, but he also blew a 2-0 and 3-2 lead. He was also a no-show in the fourth quarter of Game 7, missing a crucial layup before fouling out in the final minute. Here's another strong argument in favor of Deron Williams. From 2006 to 2008, Deron and Paul had faced each other 8 times. Deron had completely dominated Paul in most of those head-to-head matchups. The Jazz were 7-1 against the Hornets, and Deron's field goal percentage is almost 20% higher than Paul's in those games. The reasons behind the dominance came down to his versatility as a player. Deron was one of the larger point guards physically, as he was 6'3" and weighed 210 pounds. He used his great size to bully to the basket and pose up smaller opposing guards. Despite his big size, Deron still has good speed and agility. One of his go-to moves is the double crossover dribble that could snap opponents' ankles in halves. Williams is also a great shooter. In his prime, he shot close to 40% from behind the arc. Leaving the Utah Jazz was the turning point of Deron Williams' career. It was also when a debate between him and Chris Paul became obsolete. Williams was traded to the Nets in 2011 as one of the league's top point guards. However, his tenure with the Nets was a disappointment, to say the least. Deron Williams was only 26 years old when he first arrived in New Jersey. But at the age of 28, he was serviceable at best, more like a glorified role player, averaging only 14 and 6. And by the age of 29, his career was basically over. His brief stints with the Mavs and the Cavaliers did very little to revive his career. He eventually retired at 32. His sudden fall from grace remained one of the biggest mysteries of the modern NBA. During his time with the Nets, he suffered through multiple ankle issues and wrist injuries. But injury alone cannot explain his stunning collapse. Williams' journey from elite to relevancy was both physical and mental. Deron never embraced the role of a leader, along with being the focal point of New York. The massive expectations that came from the Nets' historic payroll definitely didn't help either. In fact, according to his one-time Brooklyn teammate Paul Pierce, it was indeed the case. "I think a lot of pressure got to him sometimes," Pierce said. This was his first time in the national spotlight. I think it really affected him. Williams' career tails off in a really unusual way that nobody could have predicted. For a brief moment, it seemed Deron Williams was on the fast track to the Hall of Fame when he stood toe-to-toe with Chris Paul. Now, it's almost certain that he'll be buried in the ground among other forgotten stars. But when future NBA fans reflect on this era of basketball, he will surely be someone who catches them by surprise.